The funeral ended the way dust storms do on the high plains. Slow at first, then, all at once, folks drifted off in ones and twos, boots crunching gravel, hats tipped low, eyes averted from the widow standing by the fresh mound of earth. Eli Mercer stayed where he was, long after the preacher folded his Bible, long after the last hymn died in the cottonwoods. He stayed because leaving felt like a second burial, and he had already done more than his share of that kind of work. The sun hung low and mean, painting the sky the color of old blood and rusted iron. The coffin had been lowered, the ropes coiled like tired snakes beside the grave, and still Eli did not move. His black hat cast a shadow across his eyes, but nothing could hide the truth of what he was feeling. The man in the ground had been his brother in all but blood, and the woman still standing was the only thing tethering him to this place. Now Clara Boone stood stiff as a fence post, hands folded tight at her waist, dressed in black that swallowed the light around her. She did not cry, not then, not when the coffin was lowered, not when the preacher spoke of peace and rest. Her face held the quiet terror of someone who did not yet understand what goodbye meant, or how to survive it. Eli had ridden in from 3 counties over when he heard the news. A hard ride through cold wind and bad memories. He had planned to pay his respects, tip his hat, say a few words, and ride out before the ache set in. But plans were flimsy things out here, and they broke easy under the weight of grief. The last of the mourners disappeared down the trail, wagon wheels creaking, horses snorting, life inching back toward its usual rhythm. Still, Clara did not move from the grave, and neither did Eli. The space between them felt wider than the prairie, filled with words neither of them knew how to speak. Eli cleared his throat, the sound loud in the sudden quiet. He took a step forward, then stopped, unsure of his place now. He had been hired hand, trail partner, and friend, but none of those titles fit anymore. The man who gave them meaning was gone, and all that remained was this silence, and the woman trapped inside it. Clara finally turned, her eyes red but dry, like the land after a long drought. She looked at Eli as though seeing him for the first time, and for a moment he thought she might ask him to leave, or worse, ask him to stay. Instead, she said nothing, and that nothing weighed heavier than any command. Eli knew then why his boots would not turn toward the trail, why his horse remained tied to the post, why the idea of riding away made his chest tighten. Clara Boone did not know how to say goodbye, and until she did, someone had to remain behind to witness the waiting, and whether he wanted it or not, that someone was him. The Boone ranch house stood quiet as a held breath, its porch boards creaking under Eli's boots as he followed Clara up the steps. The door still hung slightly crooked from the day Daniel Boone had slammed it shut during a summer storm years back, and inside the air smelled of cold ashes, leather, and the faint trace of pipe tobacco. Every object seemed frozen mid-memory, as if the house itself refused to accept that its master would not return. Clara moved through the rooms like a ghost who had not yet learned she was dead, touching nothing, avoiding the chair where her husband used to sit, the table where his hands had rested, and Eli understood then that grief was not loud for everyone. Sometimes it was a careful silence that threatened to break you open if you breathed wrong. Supper passed without much being said. Tin plates scraped softly, coffee cooled untouched. Eli kept his eyes down, aware of how wrong it felt to be here, and how impossible it had felt to leave. Clara finally spoke when the shadows stretched long across the floor. She asked him how the trail had been, a simple question, but her voice wavered as if the words had traveled a long way to reach her mouth. Eli answered honestly, told her the plains were dry, the nights cold, and that he had seen a storm building far to the west. He did not say the storm reminded him of Daniel, of the way trouble always came on the man fast and hard. Morning came sharp and early, the kind of dawn that made a man believe in work as salvation. Eli saddled his horse out of habit, then stopped, realizing there was nowhere he was meant to go. Clara stood in the doorway watching him, her eyes searching for something she could not name. She asked if he planned to leave that day, and the question struck him harder than any fist. Eli said he would stay a bit, help mend fences, see to the stock, say it like it was a practical decision. But both of them heard the lie in it. Staying was not about work, it was about the space Daniel had left behind, and how dangerous it was to let that space remain empty. Days began to blur together. Fences got fixed, cattle counted, a broken gate yet the real labor happened in quieter moments, when Clara would stop in the middle of the yard, staring toward the hills as if expecting a rider to crest the ridge, or when she would start to speak Daniel's name and then swallow it whole. Eli learned to recognize those moments, learned when to offer a word and when to let silence do the heavy lifting. He had always been good with horses and weather, but this was different. Grief did not follow rules. It circled back on itself, bucked when you thought it was broken one evening. As the wind rattled the windows and dust whispered against the walls, Clara finally broke, not with tears at first, but with anger. She spoke of all the things Daniel had left unfinished, the promises half made, the plans they had talked about late at night. Her voice cracked as she said she did not know how to live in a world where he had simply stopped existing. Eli listened, his jaw tight, his hands clenched, because every word she spoke mirrored something inside him. Daniel had been the man who pulled him out of a saloon brawl, who trusted him with his life on the trail, who believed Eli was better than the sum of his mistakes. When Clara finally cried, it came hard and sudden, like rain after years of drought. Eli did not move at first, afraid that any gesture might shatter her, but she stepped closer, leaning into the solid truth of another human being still standing, and without thinking, he rested a hand on her shoulder. It was an innocent touch, meant only as comfort, yet it carried a weight that made his chest ache, because comfort could turn into something else if either of them let it, and neither of them was ready to face what that might mean. Word spread fast in small places. Neighbors rode by under the pretense of checking fences, offering help that came bundled with curiosity. Eli felt their eyes on him, felt the unspoken questions hanging in the air. What was he still doing here? How long did he plan to stay? Clara noticed it too. Her posture stiffened whenever someone lingered too long, and one afternoon she told Eli he did not owe her anything. The words were meant to free him, but they sounded more like a plea, and he answered by saying nothing at all that night. Eli lay awake in the small room off the kitchen, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around him. He understood now that staying was no longer just about helping a widow through her grief. It was about choosing whether he would walk away before something deeper took root. Clara Boone did not know how to say goodbye, and Eli Mercer was starting to fear that neither did he. Not to Daniel, not to the life they had known, and not to the quiet pull growing stronger with every passing day. Trouble announced itself the way it always did, on horseback, and without apology. 3 riders came up the Boone Drive one afternoon, dust hanging around them like a bad reputation. Eli knew 2 of them from a past he had worked hard to bury, men who remembered his name for all the wrong reasons. They brought news wrapped in smiles. Debts Daniel had settled with his life, the business that now fell to whoever stood closest. Clara watched from the porch, her hand tight on the rail, while Eli felt the old pull toward violence stir in his blood, and he knew staying had just grown more complicated. The men did not stay long, but they left behind a threat that lingered heavier than gunsmoke. Clara asked what they wanted after they rode off, and Eli told her enough to keep her safe without reopening wounds. That night he checked the locks, walked the perimeter, and slept light, his senses tuned to every sound. He understood then that goodbye was not just an ending. Sometimes it was a reckoning, and the past rarely accepted being left behind. Quietly the confrontation came at dawn 2 days later, when the riders returned, louder this time, hands loose near their holsters. Eli met them in the yard, the sun at his back, his voice steady even as his heart hammered. Words turned sharp, then useless, and the moment snapped. The world narrowed to motion and instinct. When it ended, one man lay wounded, the others riding hard for the horizon. Eli stood breathing dust and fear. Knowing there was no riding away from what had been done, Clara ran to him, her face pale but fierce. She did not ask what he had done, only whether he was hurt, and that question broke something open inside both of them. For the first time since the funeral, she spoke Daniel's name out loud, not as a wound, but as a truth. She said she loved him, said she always would, and that loving him did not end because he was gone. But she could not live forever in the space he left behind. Eli listened, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. He told her then what he had never allowed himself to say, that Daniel had saved his life more than once, that staying had begun as duty, but turned into something he could not name without feeling ashamed. He said he would leave if she asked, that he would ride before sunset and never look back, but that he needed her to understand one thing first. He was not replacing Daniel, and he never would. Clara stood quiet for a long moment, the wind lifting strands of her hair. She said goodbye then, not to Eli, but to the man she had buried. She spoke to the air, to the hills, to the life they had shared, and when she turned back, Her eyes were wet but clear. She told Eli goodbye was not about erasing the past. It was about making room for the living the next morning. Eli saddled his horse at dawn. The sky pale and endless above them. Clara stood beside him, not reaching for his hand, not asking him to stay. She thanked him for staying when she did not know how to let go, for bearing witness to her grief until it softened enough to be carried. And that was when Eli understood the hardest truth of all. Sometimes staying long enough to say goodbye was the bravest thing a man could do. Eli rode out as the sun broke over the plains, the Boone ranch shrinking behind him, the past no longer clawing at his back. Clara watched until he disappeared from sight, then turned toward the house. The door open, the day waiting. Goodbye had finally been spoken, not as an ending, but as a beginning neither of them could yet name.